You know, some people find Star Trek the Animated Series flat, maybe even a little sketchy. But after I watch it, I'm nearly always glad I tuned in. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. This is a review of the premiere episode of Star Trek the Animated Series, Beyond the Farthest Star. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what happens in it, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. When I watched this episode this morning, I tried to put myself in the mindset of a Star Trek fan in the early 1970s. Imagine that, if you have to, I know some of my viewers remember being Star Trek fans in the early 1970s, so if any of you are watching now, let me know if I'm anywhere close to the mark here, but imagine you find this sci-fi adventure show that you really like. It was canceled after 3 seasons. It's been out of production for 4 years. You probably assume that's all you're going to get, aside from perhaps the odd tie-in comic or novel every now and then, if you're lucky. But then, in September of 1973, it's back! Sort of. It's a Saturday morning cartoon show rather than a live-action primetime series, but it's got the original cast back to provide the voices of their old characters. Mostly, sorry Walter. And some of the episodes are being written by folks who were involved with the original series. D.C. Fontana, David Gerrold, Mark Daniels. They even hired Walter Koenig to write one. You're welcome, Walter. Award-winning sci-fi author Larry Niven is scripting in episode 2. Sounds promising. Yeah, sure, it's a cartoon aimed at children, but there's no rule saying you can't watch. So, you turn on the TV that first Saturday morning, and there's the Enterprise, and the opening narration, same as it was on the old show, recited by William Shatner, and the theme song is different, but very evocative of the original, and you kind of dig it. It sounds like the Saturday morning cartoon version of the Star Trek theme ought to sound, somehow, you know. The episode credits come up, and you see that this first show was written by Samuel Peoples. He wrote Star Trek's second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before. All in all, this is pretty cool. Anyway, that's what I imagine it might have been like. An unexpected revival of a thing you liked and thought was gone, being produced in a new format, but involving many of the same people who made it the first time. It must have felt like a gift. And even though I wasn't around at the time, and in fact didn't see Star Trek the Animated Series at all until I was a teenager, and didn't watch the whole series until I was in my mid-20s, that's how I feel about it too. The animated series has become this little out-of-the-way corner of Star Trek, and if you become a big enough fan, you go to visit it, see what it's like, and hopefully enjoy it for what it is. This first episode, Beyond the Farthest Star, has the strengths and weaknesses of the animated series on full display. Once you get past the novelty of seeing the classic Enterprise and crew in animated form, which is pretty neat, what's left is Star Trek, only shorter, a bit weirder visually, and less lively overall. The animation isn't great. The show was produced by Filmation, and if you know, you know. Some of the vocal performances are uninspired, sounding as though the actors aren't very motivated and are mostly interested in picking up a check. Shocking, I know. And the limited library of music cues gets repetitive real fast. In other words, it's a typical cheapo 1970s Saturday morning children's cartoon. It's actually average or slightly above average in technical quality for the era. Compare it to Filmation's earlier DC Comics-based shows, or the Marvel superhero show produced by Grant Ray Lawrence Animation in 1966, and it comes out looking pretty good. But by today's standards, it feels a little crude. Which is not to say it doesn't have its strong points. Despite its technical simplicity, the animated format allows the show to be much more visually experimental and creative than the producers of the live-action original series could ever afford to be. Beyond the Farthest Star has the Enterprise encountering an ancient alien spacecraft orbiting the core of a dead star. The design of the ship is like nothing we ever see in the original series, like a series of vines stretching out into space, with the various chambers of the ship appearing like buds on those vines. It's the sort of thing you might expect to see on the cover of a pulp sci-fi magazine, or maybe within the pages of the Gold Key Star Trek comics, which always took more of a cue from pulp sci-fi than from the show anyway. I really dig it. The animated format also allows the show to place our characters in situations that would have been difficult or impossible to do in the live-action series. When Kirk leads an away team over to the alien ship, they initially materialize on the outside, standing on the outer hull of the ship, protected from the vacuum of space only by their life support belts, which project yellow force fields around their bodies. Cheaper than having to design separate versions of each character wearing spacesuits, and a charmingly goofy visual to boot. It's not just the freedom that comes with animation that does the show a few favors. The shortened running time helps too. As much as I love it, and I truly love Star Trek the original series, there are many, many episodes, including some very good ones, that feel heavily padded. Animated or not, I sometimes wonder if Star Trek, like The Twilight Zone before it, wouldn't have been better suited to a half-hour format. Trim the fat, no padding necessary, get to the point and get out. Beyond the Farthest Star runs 24 minutes, and in that time, the crew of the Enterprise finds the dead star, gets pulled in by its powerful gravity and barely manages to turn into an orbit to avoid crashing, discovers the ancient alien ship. Kirk and the away team visit the ship, explore for a bit, realize that a malevolent alien being is aboard, beam back to the Enterprise, inadvertently allowing the evil alien, which is some kind of magnetic life form, to follow them, fight the alien for control of the Enterprise, outsmart the alien and maroon it on the dead star, and get the hell out of Dodge to continue their mission. It's a lot, but it doesn't feel rushed or crowded, and it never really drags. There are a few beats that come across as awkward or repetitive, but that's more the fault of the small budget and limited animation than the writing. I'm not saying Beyond the Farthest Star compares favorably to even an average episode of the original series. It doesn't. But in terms of pacing, it makes an excellent case that Star Trek the original series would have been better off at 30 minutes than 60. Perhaps not always, but generally. The story of Beyond the Farthest Star is classic Star Trek fare. An unexpected discovery leads to an evil entity taking over the ship, which Captain Kirk is able to outsmart and overcome in the nick of time. The evil entity has been trapped aboard the ancient alien ship for hundreds of thousands of years by the powerful gravity of the dead star, and means to use the Enterprise to escape. That idea would be revisited 16 years later in the movie Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, with a few modifications. The line, "What does a glowy green magnetic organism need with a starship?" just doesn't have the same ring to it. So yeah, I'm not going to argue that it's a great artistic achievement, or that it's even on the same level as the series that preceded it or the ones that have followed it. That's not a fair comparison. But Star Trek the Animated Series is a lot of fun if you meet it where it is, and Beyond the Farthest Star is an example of that. You get to see Captain Kirk and crew in more fanciful settings than you probably would have gotten to see them in during the original series, played by their original actors, sounding a little more bored than they usually did in live action, but hey, what are you going to do? And you get a relatively tight half-hour episode instead of one that has to stretch things out to fill an hour. Can't complain about that. Those are my thoughts on the first episode of Star Trek the Animated Series. Please do share your thoughts in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. As for next week, a slight change of plans. I had intended to pause these retro reviews when the third season of Star Trek Picard began and do reviews of the new Picard episodes in this slot in my production schedule instead, but my best buddy and podcast co-host Jason Harding and I are going to review this third and final season of Picard together, and because of scheduling requirements, we'll be doing those reviews on Saturdays, which means Thursdays will still be open. That being the case, I'm going to keep these retro reviews going for a while longer. You folks who have been watching seem to like them. and I like them too. So, join me next week as I begin a series of retro reviews looking at my personal favorite episodes of each of these 6 series from the previous eras of the Star Trek franchise, including the animated series, starting with my favorite episode of Star Trek the Original Series, Amok Time. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.